Hi, I'm Father Joe Grimaldi, but you can call me Joe, and welcome today to my podcast. Today, I would like to talk to you a little bit about baptism, one of the 7 sacraments of the Church, actually a sacrament of initiation. Christians believe that the only way to truly meet the Lord is by baptism. Let's talk about baptism and maybe put some understanding as to why we baptize and its origin. But here now is our host, Ken Calvert.
Father, it's a fascinating time of the year in the Catholic Church, celebrating the Epiphany. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about is so many churches put a lot of importance into the baptism. We actually have a feast day for the baptism of Jesus Christ, correct?
We do, yes.
And that occurred later in life and not early in life yet. In the Catholic Church, a lot of people schedule their baptism probably within months after the birth of their child.
You're very correct. I mean, there was this fear in the early days that the child might die without baptism. And consequently, parents wanted the child baptized almost immediately. As a matter of fact, you said months, but sometimes it could be a week, 2 weeks, and so on and so forth, because they wanted to make sure that child was baptized. Now, we have come a long way from that. Very often, and generally speaking, the people in the church wait a lot longer than a few days or a few weeks. Sometimes they wait a year. Sometimes they wait a lot more than that, and they shouldn't. But in any case, I'm going to try to tie this in with the baptism of the Lord. The baptism of the Lord, first of all, is a special feast that brings to an end the Christmas season. You have the Epiphany, which is what's called Little Christmas, the Feast of the Three Kings, the Feast of the Magi, and so on. But then a week later, we come to the baptism of the Lord. Symbolically, well, not so much symbolically, there was a clarification that was made in order to help the people understand the role of John the Baptist and the role of Jesus Christ. Don't forget, because John the Baptist was around before Jesus Christ was popular, a lot of people put their faith in John the Baptist, and they thought he was the Messiah. And so John, in order to take away the attention from himself, would say, you have to look at him. He came after me, but he came before me. But here's the one whose sandals I'm not even fit to tie. Let me put it that way. So in any case, I came to baptize with water. But Jesus came and comes to baptize with the Spirit. So the baptism of Jesus really clarifies John's role in the church. The importance of John the Baptism in the eyes of the people was tremendous. As I said, so many people thought he was the Messiah, and it was very difficult to take away that title from him. And so he had to make sure that Jesus was the one who came as the Messiah. John was a righteous man. The Bible doesn't say a lot. It simply says he was a righteous man. He stood up for the truth. He didn't care who was around. He didn't care for the consequences, but he stood up for the truth. Here we have John the Baptist at this feast that was being held, and they had these variant, Herod and so on and so forth were there, and sure enough, there was this young woman, Salome, who was the dancer, and she asked her mother, the king said to her, I will give you whatever you want, no matter what it is. And so then this young girl goes to ask her mother, what should I ask for? And she said, the head of John the Baptist on a platter. So what happens is she tells the king. The king is too embarrassed to go back on his promise. He's surrounded by all of these wonderful people in his court, and so he has to go ahead with it. And that's how John the Baptist was martyred, if you want. That's a very dramatic way of bringing across the point that John the Baptist was a righteous man. He wasn't afraid to speak the truth. Now, a lot of people would fudge on that in those days, because of Jesus. Who is this Jesus? Why? John always stood by Jesus. And maybe a lot of people feared, even Herod feared, that he was doing the wrong thing when he asked to have the head of John the Baptist, because he realized himself, I think that this guy is the real thing. So his credentials, I can't tell you much about his credentials. What I can tell you is that the scriptures make it clear that John the Baptist was a righteous man and therefore a man to be feared. And he's a precursor to Jesus. He's not the Messiah. He makes that clear. I came to testify to the truth, and that's my job. But here's the truth.
So, simply put, in my world, I would say John was a very good man, realized that these were troubled times. He went out and suggested to people that there's a better life, there's a better way, there's a good way of doing things, and he became sort of a precursor to the preacher. Did he have a common job?
I think you said it beautifully, you really did. But the thing is this, that he had built up such a popularity that it was time for him to make sure that people realized that he was not the Messiah. That there was the Messiah.
There's the confusion that I have is, where did his motivation come from?
I couldn't tell you right off the bat here. I'd have to really give that some more thought. He was a good man. He was a holy man. He was raised well and so on and so forth. But he was unique. There was something special about him, so much so that he even was able to gather a following.
He baptizes Jesus Christ, and we celebrate that feast day coming up right around the Epiphany. Is that an extremely important day in the history of the Catholic Church?
In a way it is. It means that this is where Jesus establishes his mission. For every baptism, your baptism, my baptism, we are given a mission. And the mission is rather simple when you think about it, but we're to go out and do and say good. And we're supposed to share that with others. Now, the doing part is what's difficult. Saying is easy, okay? But that's our mission, really, to spread the word about the salvation is at hand. Jesus kept repeating that. Salvation is at hand. Heaven is at hand. You know, some people say, well, what does that mean? Heaven is at hand. Heaven is there, but it's here too. And how is it here? It's here because you make it happen little by little by little. You can make heaven happen here on earth. Maybe not all of a sudden, not all at once, but you have the power to do good even around you, and that could spread and become something wonderful. So when we speak about the heaven is far away, but it's also here if we take our mission seriously.
Why does water represent being baptized?
It simply represents cleansing. There's a certain cleansing that takes place. Don't forget, in those days, baptism meant that they were submerged into the waters. And so that when they entered into the waters, it was almost death-like. But then, when they came back up, it was new life. All of the past had been erased. And now they're new people, people born in Jesus Christ, if you want, people with a mission, people ready to go out and do good.
So when you see the other various fractions of Christianity, where they actually hold the person down almost to suggest a drowning, you're talking about somebody becoming overwhelmed with fear, like, I'm dying, I'm dying, I'm dying, and then they're lifted up out of the water, and they take that glorious breath. Is that a decent way of describing it?
Exactly. It speaks loudly of the symbol.
Okay.
Now, we have to be careful because we have to be practical. I was asked to do that with an infant. Put the infant under the water. They are used to water. I said, no, I can't do that. I said, what I did is I brushed the infant, this way, but I could not put him underwater and see what would happen. No, it wasn't my style.
The ceremony involves more than just the water. There's anointing that goes on. Explain that to me.
Yes, the anointing is very complicated, and I'll tell you why. Since the beginning of Jesus Christ, since the beginning of his times until now, theologians have been fighting a lot about what is confirmation. Is it already done at baptism? Why? Because they put the oil of chrism, on the head of the individual. Now, the oil of chrism is used primarily for confirmation. It's also used for the ordination of priests. It's used also in churches when they establish a new altar and they pour the oil of chrism all over the altar completely and the walls of a new church and so on, to consecrate that particular church or that altar. In any case, that oil of chrism is a very important symbol in confirmation. It's used at baptism. Now, in the beginning, when Jesus Christ, when there was just one Catholic church, I shouldn't say Catholic, one Christian church, followers of Jesus Christ, you had a number of people that instead of waiting, and the waiting period, by the way, that's why I think it takes a lot of explanation, it takes a long time. If you look at the Greek Catholic Church, the Orthodox churches, they do baptism, confirmation, all at one full swoop right at the beginning. So there isn't this waiting period between baptism and confirmation and so on and so forth. So that when a person enters into the church, we do it now when a person decides he wants to be a Catholic, and so he goes through what we call the RCIA program, and after that, on the eve of Easter, he's baptized and he's confirmed all at once. So it isn't that waiting period. So there's something about what happens at baptism that maybe makes confirmation already done, if you want, at the baptism. That's something that goes against the idea that we have 7 sacraments, this type of thing, instead of 6. I don't know how it's eventually going to work out, but theologians will continue to work this out for years to come. There's a big move in the church right now to go back to baptism, confirmation, and communion right at a very young age. What they would do for little ones, they would put a drop of wine of the precious blood, a drop of that precious blood on the tongue of the infant. So this way he's received communion and so on. Interestingly, baptism, confirmation, and then communion, because in order to receive communion, you have to be part of the communion. And so after you receive confirmation, that completes your initiation, and so now you are part of the communion, the community, and so you put that drop of blood on the child's tongue. So they do all of that. Even today, for example, if you were to go to Europe where the Catholic Greek Church does all 3 sacraments at infancy, we don't. One of the things that has developed into the way we do things is the way the church grew in the early years. Because it grew in big numbers almost immediately, they wanted to make sure that the person performing the confirmation was a bishop. Well, the bishop couldn't go everywhere all the time, so they said, well, we'll have to put a time limit, this type of thing. They would put a time limit. And this is how it's developed, that you have baptism, and then you have First Communion, and then you have to wait. Now, there's a lot of arguments about waiting too, because that is like some teachers of religious ed, use confirmation as a carrot. Okay. You have to keep coming to these classes
Yep.
until you are confirmed. You may not be confirmed till you're 81, but meanwhile, you'll be coming to these classes. I'm exaggerating. But I think that was the idea behind their thinking, that maybe if we can hold on to that. Well, now, even the Roman Catholic Church is my own diocese in Honolulu. They've moved it up quite a bit. They do, what they do is someone is baptized at infancy, but then when they receive communion, they do confirmation the next day, even when they're 7 or whatever the case might be. So they do it almost immediately, because if they're ready, if they're confirmed, they can receive communion.
There are so many questions that I have because of the fact that the distance between the baptism, the first communion, and the confirmation.
Yeah.
And I remember with the first communion, that was a very, very important moment, not only for me, but more, I think, for my parents.
Very much so.
My parents were extremely pleased that this occasion was going to occur. I'm not as sure my parents were that excited about my confirmation as they were about my first communion. Does that make sense? Is the confirmation a very important date in a child's life?
It is, but depending on the view of the different theologians, you already received confirmation between, when you are anointed with the oil of chrism. There are 3 oils that the bishop blesses on the eve of Easter, and one of them is the oil of chrism. But that's the oil that's used at confirmation. It's used at baptism, and so on. We also use the oil of catechumen at baptism. Sometimes, not always. The oil of catechumen was an oil that was used before the person actually went through the ceremony of being received into the church. Why? The oil of catechumen meant that you were being strengthened to face the challenges that were ahead. Almost like this. If you look at the history, and you know better than I on this, of the Olympic athletes, very often they were covered in oil for strength and for speed in whatever actions they participated. Well, that's related. So the oil of catechumen was to be used so that the individual would be strengthened to face the challenges of what was ahead. The oil of chrism was an oil of consecration, is an oil of consecration, and therefore this is where the debate comes in. Is a person already confirmed at baptism, or isn't he?
Final question. At baptism, given the fact that I'll refer to you in this case as an elder.
Yeah, that's okay. I can handle it. I asked my doctor, I said, I think I'm getting old. He says, no, you are old. So,
Get used to it, Father.
yeah.
You're no different than anyone else.
Okay.
Would you be opposed to, at baptism, also confirming and doing a first communion?
No, I wouldn't be. As a matter of fact, my whole thesis was on that.
That's the Lord calling, by the way. He wanted to talk to you about that thesis.
Not everybody agrees with me, but the whole idea was, yes, since it's being done since the time of Jesus Christ, why are we so different? To me, it makes sense. I mean, look at these Greek Catholics. They come here. Well, they've already been receiving communion. They're already confirmed, and they've already been baptized. Now, there is a little bit of a problem, practical, in that what keeps the kids coming to religious ed? See, this is what I said before. I'm being crass about it. There's no question. We can use it as a carrot. You keep coming, and eventually the big day will come when you receive confirmation. Well, I have a problem with that. First of all, if confirmation is supposed to strengthen you and make you a stronger soldier of Christ, and so on and so forth, why be deprived all those years of having received it? Get it when you can. But anyway, the controversy continues to this day.
Let's wrap it up with this. My final question is, what about the really, and let me use the expression, hardcore Catholics that believe everything should remain the same? Baptism within a few weeks to maybe a couple of months. First communion, age 7. The confirmation, 9 or 10. The people that will push back on any new ideas regarding those 3 events in a child's life.
That happens in religion, but it happens in everything else as well. We have to be understanding. We have to be charitable. We have to be loving with these people. But by the same token, once the Pope speaks, once the Holy Father speaks, once the Church in general agrees that we should move a certain way, I believe that we should move a certain way. That doesn't mean we want to forget these people. They're good people. There's nothing wrong with them. It's just that maybe with time they'll come around and understand what's going on. We accept all baptisms of the mainstream churches. So if they've been baptized, we accept that baptism. So, for example, when somebody wants to be a Catholic at Holy Name or St. Hugo's, wherever, and he's already been baptized a Methodist, we say, fine, he doesn't need to be baptized. He needs to be received into the church. So we make that distinction because we do honor the baptism of other churches as well, the mainstream churches, not if they baptize with rose petals on the heads and so on. No, it's the Trinitarian formula and the water being poured.
Do you stand on the fact that if you are not baptized, you cannot go to heaven?
Define baptism.
Baptism is, I don't have the answer. Do you?
I'll just give you a quick response, and obviously it's one of these things that has to be taken, studied, I think, and so on. You take, for example, the poor. There aren't too many people that are out of touch with the world anymore. But at one time, not too long ago, there were people, and there may still be, in the middle of Africa, let's say, in one of the countries of Africa, that have never heard of Jesus Christ. And they are good people. And they are not sinning, probably much better than a lot of baptized Catholics. Are they going to be refused heaven? I don't think so.
I agree.
So, baptism. There's a baptism of desire in the church. There's a baptism of fire in the church. So there's all sorts of different baptisms. We deal with the one we've been discussing today, but we have to look at for example, a baptism of desire is somebody who's always wanted to be baptized but never was, but lived the Christian life. I'm doing a marriage preparation right now because it's kind of interesting. The woman is Catholic and the man is not. Well, I'm looking at the life of this guy. He's got to be a saint, and there's no question in my mind. So I said, some people might call you a pagan, but you're a damn good pagan.
And I just don't see it going, good guy, but sorry.
No,
there's another place for you over here.
If you don't go to heaven, I ain't going either. So that's all right.
Listen to that. I believe that we've just gotten a message that it's time to stop the podcast. I'm Ken Calvert. That's Father Joe. And thank you for joining us.
This is Father Joe Grimaldi, and I look forward to seeing you next time on the Father Joe Podcast.